It is 5 o'clock somewhere, and you've tuned in to Season 2, Episode 14 of BRC. For those of you who'd like to watch this episode, I highly recommend it. We're live and in person on the Emerald Isle. You can view Season 2 on our website, YouTube, and Spotify. I'm Carrie Moynihan, and in today's Whiskey Whereabouts, I catch up with author and soon-to-be doctor, Fionnán O'Connor. Last we spoke on Season 1, Episode 2, he opened up about how his academic career led him to making historic Irish whiskey the topic of his thesis for his PhD. Today, we'll see how far he's come with his research and talk a little bit about the Red Book of Ossory, which is said to document Ireland as the first place to distill whiskey. Stay with us.
Tuar, from the Old Irish for family or nation, is a conical-shaped nosing and tasting glass for whiskey that functions superbly by concentrating and capturing all the aromas and flavours that make Irish whiskey unique. The generosity of Irish spirit is reflected in the enhanced chamber capacity, delivering a more generous drinking experience. With the rebirth of Irish whiskey production, the development of new world-class distilleries, visitor centres, and the Irish Whiskey Tourism Trail, it's time for a contemporary glass to become the iconic symbol unifying Irish whiskey drinkers around the world. Tuar, the Irish whiskey glass.
Fionnán, it was so great to see you in person.
Oh,
How have you been?
very few people have said that before.
Oh, that's not true. That is not true. All around the country, everyone's like, you know who you should talk to? Fionnán O'Connor. I said, I know all about him. Obviously, you haven't listened to the podcast because he was already on it.
Yeah, that's what you tell them in return,
exactly.
exactly.
So since the last time you were here, well, we weren't here together, but we were here together.
Right, in a cosmic
virtual,
sense.
Yes. You're still working on the thesis.
Yes, 8
And
days.
I have now had a chance to taste one of the recipes that was in your blind tasting.
Oh, right.
And I got to taste not only the new make, but the current version of the aged product, which are right here.
Right, I'm in a dead heat with, do I become a doctor legally or does the stock become whiskey legally first? It'll be a great moment of shame if I don't beat the whiskey to it.
Gotta beat the whiskey to it.
But I think I'll get in there.
The number 10. And we drove by Bowen last night to take some pictures. That's a beautiful distillery. It saddens my heart that they haven't been able to get permission to put the barrels in the back where all those big glass windows are.
Oh, yeah. No, it is a strange looking at. You can see it from the road. Do you know the history of the building?
No.
It used to be a garage, like a car sales garage.
Okay.
And that's why it has these big glass front windows. And when you go in, there's still marble flooring because they didn't take it out. So it's the best tiled distillery I've ever been in. Very, very snazzy tiling and window dressing.
I thought they should at least store some empty barrels there just to make it look pretty. But it looks pretty. But maybe they would think people come by and say, "You're gonna explode! Get out of here!" So, all right. So everybody's been saying we need to talk to you. You're the wisest man in whiskey. And now I'm learning you also know a little bit about poutine.
Well, I'd say at this point, poutine knows a little bit about me. It's a give and take. It's not as clear as kind of master and student. I'd say it's more of a tango with that drink. But yes, they're joined together at the hip as drinks. Poutine is kind of the protein magma from which whiskey sprung. There's certainly, poutine is just the Irish manifestation of grassroots cereal distilling. Originally cereal distilling and then kind of cereal plus irreverence distilling. So of course it and whiskey share the initial, birthing years with each other, and it's only when they kind of hit their 20s. They're like childhood friends that kind of are a bit embarrassed by each other after they hit 18, and but they got on from the age of 4 to 18 inseparably.
Now let me ask you, with all your research, did you take a look at the Red Book?
The Red Book of Ossory?
Yeah.
Yes, I have seen it.
Did you get to touch it?
No, but I have with gloves gone through it. It's curated by a fellow named Adrian MP. He's a reverend, and he organised very generously to get me some time with it. A lot of that stuff is really for mysticism at this point because you can access the digital version without too much of a fuss, and that's always the letdown, is when archives have been digitized. There's no real reason, unless you're doing like manuscript studies, to go near them, but you still don't turn down the opportunity,
No, you should
when you
definitely
can get
say
it.
the original winner. So when you were looking at that book, the recipe that's written in it, would you say that's more of a poutine or more of a whiskey?
Neither.
Okay.
So the Red Book of Ossory is itself actually part of a family of texts. So, well, the Red Book of Ossory contains a lot of stuff. It's mostly hymns and things. It's only just a sliver of it that's this distilling treatise. But it's not, and this is where a lot of people kind of make a mistake, it's not actually a description of whiskey or even of like Irish distilling at all. It's actually a copy of an Italian manuscript. So there's a manuscript called Consilia Medicinalia written by a guy named Taddeo Alderotti, and that's passed around Europe. That's a big part of just pan-European distilling history. It was written in Bologna, and it's the first major text to detail the kind of auxiliary cooling that we would call a worm coiled. He calls it the Canale Serpentinum. And so you're seeing the still design evolve into, means of slowing down cooling so that you can create, essentially refined cuts.
Right.
So the Consilia has loads of, the Consilia is a big medical work, but what's called Incipient Virtutis Aquavita. It's the beginning of that bit. Here begin the virtues of Aquavita. And it's hilarious. It's a long list of stuff that spirit cures, and it's, like helps your eyesight improve and almost a word by word hit list of everything whiskey does not do.
If it did, I wouldn't have tried those.
Restores youth, along with other stuff like cures, boils and ills. But anyway, it was, early days. People hadn't done too much testing. There was a lot of confidence in the air. But anyway, the Consilia Medicinalia itself is disseminated around Europe. And when you look at the Red Book of Ossory containing this rendition of it, and it's almost word for word, it's more a sign of Ireland's connectedness to the history of broader spirits distilling in Europe. It's a sign of attachment rather than genesis, or rather than even a commentary on contemporary Irish distilling. And what's interesting is, okay, that's the first reference to distilling in Ireland. The second one is written in a place called Fermoy, just down the road. I mean, a little bit further down the road, but East Cork, by a physician named A. Buolean. And it's in Irish, but it's essentially just an Irish translation of the same text again. It's just no longer in Latin. It's now been translated. And you see it appear again and again and again. And there's a certain kind of set of texts that this belongs to. When you take away all the veils and, there's a lot of words I could use around early whiskey history, the romance, let's say, or the misguided ends of romance. There's romance worth being romantic about, and then there's just some very bad history that goes around. And I don't think it's done out of malice. I think people just take it for granted when they hear stuff. But we're always told that wandering monks brought distilling to Ireland. And actually, if you look at this, there's a shrapnel of evidence. It's all gibberish. And my original background was in, at one point in life, I wanted to be a medievalist, and I studied along that course. And so I'd look at this stuff, and you're saying, well, hold on. You're saying something happened in the 6th century, and the first piece of evidence appears in the 14th. There is as much time between those 2 points as there is between the 14th century and now. It's such ludicrous suggestionalism, but you can see where people make the mistakes. A very early text describing, actually not describing, just a throwaway line to Aquavita is something called the Annals of Clonmacnoise. Clonmacnoise is the name of a monastery, but if you look into the text, the Annals of Clonmacnoise, first thing you learn is it had nothing to do with the monastery. It was given that name in the 1600s by an antiquarian named James Ware, and it wasn't written by monks as a text. But anyway, when you're looking at proof, and I'm a very, very big fan of evidence, of real proof, and I found this bit of the thesis writing really enthralling, and it almost took up more space. It might have to get edited down because it wasn't really the main topic, but looking at there is a huge archive of especially Irish language medical treatises, usually from the 1400s, but they stretch from the 1400s, the 1500s, and even into the mid-1600s. And you had a class of people, Olawan or an olive, singular, who were essentially hereditary physicians, hereditary doctors. The Gaelic world, both Ireland and kind of up the belt into Scotland, had these strange classes where, you know, poetry wasn't something you decided to do. You were born into a family of poets and you learned to do it from a young age. It had none of the idea of vocation that we have now. And so you had surnames that were attached to different things. You had bardic families, you had physician families, you had, you know, again, this stratified lawyer families. They must have been real fun.
Right.
They were called brehons. But anyway, the medical families are where you start seeing these initial texts. Again, you see certain families in Ireland, the O'Layans, the O'Hickeys, up in Scotland. Well, Hickey itself actually means healer. They're all names for doctor, really. O'Lee is from O'Layan, which is leech. Beaton, famously in the Scottish Highlands.
It's not called the Hickeys.
We do, but Hickey is the surname is an Anglicization of a Gaelic word for healer. It's just an unfortunate coincidence.
I'll make you a bloody mark and then we'll heal you.
Yeah, and you see that class of people are quite connected to each other. You see manuscripts move up and down. Again, a lot of that material ends up in the Beaton collections. Originally a family called McVeagh, which is literally from Baha, life. Nothing to do with whiskey, but just because they were doctors. But actually, a lot of the early distilling treatises you find in Scotland are themselves Beaton manuscripts. But when you look at what these manuscripts are, they all tie into this essential kind of sphere that's going on in Europe that informs a lot of other forms of aquavita. I mean, even the name aquavita is a giveaway. You know, that comes from the Mediterranean and spreads its way out, and you get eau de vie and aquavit and so forth. But when you look at that shared early kind of plasma of distilling as medicine, you get certain hubs. You get Salerno is the early big one, and then after that you get Montpellier in the south of France and Bologna in the north of Italy, Florence to a degree. And you start seeing these texts pop up, and they've, you know, the Concilia is one, the Lilium Medicinae, the Lily of Medicine is another, and a lot of these are just circulating around. So I think the problem is we tend to think of the invention of whiskey as, you know, when was Redbreast and Lefroy and our modern understanding of whiskey invented? And actually, it wasn't invented. It's the product of history. It's the terminus of history, rather than, you know, if you it's like tracing us back to our, you know, kind of slightly embarrassing trilobite ancestors. And, you know, they look very different, but the lineage is there, and they've been shaped, you know, similarly by historical forces into something very peculiar. So I know that's a roundabout way, but what you see in the Red Book of Austria is not really, you know, Puching is the history of grassroots distilling, grassroots lay agrarian distilling as a social trend. And that's not what that is. And whiskey is really the history of the professionalized product, and that's not what that is. You're really talking about that initial history of aquavita as a shared concept in a very specific kind of scholastic setting.
So then, in your opinion, do you think that the Red Book is not the definitive start of Irish whiskey?
No, it is, because there is no definitive start. You know, someone didn't wake up one day and you know, you could say the history of brewing is the ancestor in that sense. It's part of the process, and you can trace it back as far as you like in that sense.
But let's get back to your project. This is the number 10 sample from Bowen that you had them make.
Yes.
And so you got all the recipes from all your research.
Yes.
Brought them over to Bowen. They made them. Then you did your blind tasting.
Yes.
Okay. From the blind tasting, did you have a winner for the favorite one?
So they weren't ranked in that sense. They were ranked by olfactory traits. So, you know, you'd have something that said fruity, non-citrus, and then there'd be a few suggestive prompts in parentheses. And you were rating on a scale of 0 to 3. And so if from not detectable to extremely present. And because we're trying to make something that's highly subjective, as objective as possible. So you're given very little breathing room. You know, it's someone's idea of a 0 and a 3 is easier to track than if someone has a different idea of what's a 7. You know, and so you'd get the lineup. There were 12, so 10 mash bills and 2 controls. And you were to go down. They were cut to blending strength, and you would go down nosing for one trait. Say it was citrus, and you mark them, and then you're given a pencil with an eraser, so that if you go further down and you realize, what a 3 really is this, then you can go back and change. And it's all comparative for one trait, so that you're reviewing them at the same time. When you've gone through that, then you take another trait, say that's vanilla, and you do the same thing again. It's really the only reason I managed to get everybody to volunteer, I'm sure, is because I didn't properly explain to them how thumpingly taxing this whole day was going to be. Just absolutely zero crack. But no, and we got them at the goodwill of the participants themselves. We ended up with 27 head blenders and distillers and industry spirits consultants, the who's who, and they all volunteered their time, and they all just wanted to participate. And it was real kind of show of love toward what could be done. And in return, I was, at every turn trying to make it clear to them that, Boan distilled this stuff because somebody has to. But, and I needed, they had the right conditions. They had a control that looked like contemporary mainstream pot still, triple distillation in large pots. They had semi-automated cuts they could take, so they could ensure that the cut points were the same. They were able to separate faints, so they weren't recycling across samples. They had everything that was needed to do this. But the data belongs to everyone, and it has been subsequently embraced. And I always try to make that clear. The minute the thesis is done, it's going in a PDF online on some faraway website, some shady-looking .com, and anyone who wants to can download it plus a virus,
Right.
Free of charge.
So was there, out of the 10, there was 10 and then the 2 control, out of the 10 that you brought, was there a favorite number you had?
It might have been 10.
Good.
It's hard for me to separate them from having found them, and 10 was the first. That's the old Kilbeggan distillery mash bill, and that was probably the first mash bill I found that wasn't in a book or wasn't in, that was actually found in archival material. And so again, I kind of probably gave it a psychological head start. But it's funny, the again, some of them, had one of the biggest takeaway from the whole thing was oats. And oats seem to spike. There's one category that says sweet, non-fruity, and then parentheses it says vanilla, sugar, icing, glycerin. And that kind of, again, fruit, sweet but not fruity, that clean sugar sweetness. And oats, just almost invariably, the more you raise them up, you see it spike there, Wheat, surprise, surprise, tasted very cereally to people.
Right.
Not a huge... and of course, you're also manipulating malt and raw barley themselves, and that was a big learning. I didn't go in expecting to take away. Was the assumption, is always, we're adding more oats. Yes, but what are you taking it away from? There's only so much percentage to go around. Is it cutting down the malt, or is it cutting down the barley, or is it cutting down some other adjunct cereal? And again, the 10 were decimalized historical mash bills. And so we had to be clear that they were bound by history, obviously in decimalized form, and picked to kind of scope out certain boundaries. But we can't test everything, and so they're more kind of pitches in the desert than a fence.
So out of all the research that you did and found all these recipes, were any of them copywritten or made so that only specific people can make them?
No. Almost all the archives I went through were public. At a later stage, Irish Distillers came on board with their archive, but that actually happened after the Boan stuff. But they've been very, open with that, as long as I don't defame them or something. It's still academic research, and it'll go in showing what it is. They're not hard to find for some of the larger historical brands anyway. The Jamesons were always in court telling people they were making fraudulent Jameson. So, you see it in other spaces. And of course, mash bills in even the same distillery changed over time. So to be honest, there's just so much of it, especially when I was doing individual distilleries, because, they're dealing with 100-weight sacks. So the mash bills are never exact percentage points anyway. They kind of vibrate. And, say there aren't any oats that day, you still kind of do it live and do the thing without them. So if you're just doing a head count of all the possible percentages, there's just reams of it. But there's core concepts that emerge and core trends, and certainly those have been open. So again, the Irish Whiskey Technical File is going through revisions at the moment, and they very I would, to my great humbling thanks, took my advice on the new parameters. So the new parameters for single pot still allow for up to 30% oats, wheat, or rye, which is what the thesis was suggesting, and what the initial selection of mash bills was to a certain extent testing already. So malt, in some distilleries, malt might drop down to 27, but it was rounded up to 30 to make sure everything keeps 30% each way, and the adjuncts similarly aren't allowed to drift above 30. So again, it was two things at once. It was, again, a recreation of the past, but also picked and investigated in a way that would allow for a certain degree of exploration about what that new category might look like. And it was thrilling because yes, they do taste different, they do taste strange and I think wonderful, but they don't taste unlike Irish pot still whiskey. They taste, I might even have said this to you, I said it to somebody, it was almost like they were almost like sepia tinted versions of Irish pot still. They were the same but different, and then again, my two big fears were that they would all taste the same as each other, which thankfully they didn't, and the other fear was that they all taste like shite.
So let me ask one more question here. Out of all the experts and distillers and tasters that you had come to the panel, did anyone come back to you and say, I want to replicate that at my distillery?
Yes. Now, unfortunately, they were all blind submissions as well. They were anonymous, so I have no idea what anybody is talking about when they can't say, that one eye, blah, blah, blah. They were all put in a pile. But there were questions about, and it was quite clear, at the pub afterwards, I showed people what was on the table. So if they remembered what they were drinking that day, good luck to them,
So with all this work that you did with Bowen, did they pick one of the recipes that they want to run with at all?
I think their big project on the far side of this was to actually just keep exploring, molding pot still from the learnings more than again returning to it. I kept a log with Michael while I was doing it, and it was meant to be, certain mashes more problematic to process, or did anything go wrong? It all went fine. So the logs just turned into these like 9 a.m. drinking sessions where we were. So there's all this material there where we were comparing what happens if you push oats 5% up and take it out of malt or raw barley. And I think Michael certainly learned an enormous amount about how to manipulate mash bills in general, and I remember seeing that happen because, when we first had the first two next to each other, which were the control and then one with 5% oats, and we were kind of stunned by, oh God, if this is what it's like at the beginning, when there's a 5% difference, what's it going to be like when we really, jump in? And so now, again, they've kind of moved into that direction. I think Michael's new gig is he wants to design mash bills for casks and say, I want to pick a mash bill that would do well in a bourbon versus a sherry.
Oh, nice.
So he's doing all kinds of, and again, especially now that the file has changed and the industry has kind of gotten behind that. I think there's a lot of optimism in the air at the moment, and certainly those who were interested before can do that with a tremendous degree of confidence, and I think it's spreading into the bloodstream. There was a little trepidation to start with some people because they didn't know if it would qualify as pot still whiskey or not. But now there's again, a certain kind of boldness is entering, and a lot of people are looking at it. And even ones who aren't talking to me, it's just happening. It's an exciting time to be alive and drunk.
Speaking of exciting, I think it's time we taste number 10 in its original state, and then in its state as of yesterday. Okay, here is the new make, version 10.
Let's launch it.
Wow, I love the smell of this. It's got a nutty, oaty. Is this stuff out? Yeah. It's like breakfast. That's what it's like.
Yeah. It's a cracker, I'm a big fan of that one. So that's 15% oats, 5% rye, and then 40% malt and 40% raw barley grist.
When was the last time you tasted some of the aged stuff?
Some of the aged stuff. That sample came from Two Stacks.
Yeah.
I think the last time I was at Two Stacks, but not that one, because they bought 5 of them.
Right.
And I think I had the wheated one. I try not to exhaust my welcome there, but because Boan made a point of selling all the vast majority of the stock off, and a lot of it was bought by whiskey shops, kind of retailers like Celtic Whiskey Shop or festival groups or third-party bonders, the likes of Two Stacks and JJ Corrie and Daithí O'Connell. And that was where I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be in the bloodstream. A lot of it was bought by pubs, by whiskey societies. And so it's, I anticipate in the coming years having the ability to try this from other places, but that kind of flock has flown, so I have no idea what's going to happen to all of it now, and people can put it at whatever age they want, or this or that. So
let's taste it.
Yeah.
Let's see how this
do you mind if I try the new make first?
Yes.
Before I. Yeah. So what I loved about that spirit, again, they have that weird icing cake kind of taste that spiked with oats is there. There is that weird. It's like Frosted Flakes almost, like sugar-coated cereal kind of taste. It's that strange, like, again, not quite glycerin, but like powder sugar mixed with, you can tell this is sweet, not fruity. And oats really seem to kind of perform in that kind of vanilla landscape. And then they do have that kind of husk taste at the tail end. And then you're obviously getting a little bit of the rye there.
Yeah.
And after this was done, I did a project with Boan, where they did a few distillates pushing out the rye, because historically rye, the 3 adjuncts in Irish pot still were oats, wheat, and rye was usually the smallest, and so it didn't feature as a big one. It was there in the historical mash bills, but it didn't really go up.
Right.
The highest I've seen rye go up in historical distilling is about 17% of Irish pot still anyway.
Do you think that's because it's so hard to mash, because it overflows a lot?
It is, but it's also just not grown that heavily in Ireland. It was always there as a minority crop, sometimes used as a cover crop. But like there isn't a huge history of rye bread in Ireland. Rye's real history in Europe is like Central Europe and up into Denmark. So it was probably just to do with a reflection of availability and landscape and what's there. I've seen references to rye distilling as early as the 1700s. You see it mentioned in lists, usually on bans of things you're not supposed to distill because they're food. But it does pop up, and you do see it again pushed out to again. So the new regulation says the 3 adjuncts can go up to 30%. Now oats often went up to 30%. Wheat before the famine, you can see in that kind of space, not so much after it. And then rye was the least. But again, that I've seen that go out to about 17%. But that was kind of an outlier. So anyway, we went back and tried these, maxed out to the 30% space, because that's now what the category posts are. And it's funny with Boan's rye. Probably to do with triple distillation as much as anything. What was coming through from the rye was this kind of like more of the like potpourri lavendery side of rye, rather than the kind of dill pickle kind of pastrami sandwich stuff you can get in rye whiskey in the States, but there was that weird like dead flower kind of potpourri, and even at 5% I think it's there. So I the things I love about that mash are A, that vanilla, but B, it's kind of quirked up a bit by that, A, that potpourri, and B, just pot still oil, the raw barley grist. That was another big takeaway. Raw barley is what defines Irish pot still as a style, and we kind of took it for granted how valuable it is, but it really does make an enormous difference. And when you see it in action, that just oil, that it's a mouthfeel thing, and it really does, again, come into its own in some of them. Now this, I know what I'm using the empty glass.
Well, it still smells like it.
And this one was in a rum cask, correct?
Yes. I can definitely smell this one in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my next big fear, was that it was all going to get drowned out by the cask, especially because Boan made some very loud cask decisions with these, where they put a third of them into sherry, a third of them into rum, and a third of them into rejuvenated wine barrels. The casks they chose were almost kind of tie-ins to the thesis topics as much as anything, and also they just had access to some really good casks. So I was thinking,
did you get to have any say in what ones went into what casks?
So I showed them a receipt for a cask that had, it was a port cask with rum heads, and saying, how about this? And I could see the eyes, kind of raise. And to their credit, they actually looked into it to see if it could be done, but it was just too much of a nightmare. But no, again, I was curious about how they would survive or what they would do in these different woods. I didn't have any of them for the first year. And I've only had a few of them since. And rum was one I was wondering, well, okay, what will happen with something so sugary and rich? And there is a lot of records of rum casks floating about back into the bloodstream, not just in this kind of early 17th heyday of rum in Ireland, but even into the 1950s, you see rum casks. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can still smell obviously that vanilla,
and the vanilla
has just, got on like a duck to water with rum. I mean, it makes sense, that kind of icing flavor, and then, that very specific sweetness that rum can give off that is in that same kind of non-fruity, clean sweetness space. Not that rum can't be fruity, but there is that weird, almost more ethanol vapor kind of sweetness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even the potpourri is still there. I was wondering if that would last. In fact, if anything, it's more there. It's more noticeable.
Oh, yeah, definitely
absolutely more. That kind of like crushed dead lavender flower, things that my mother might have burnt in the
in the bathroom.
Yeah, the once upon a time, these
little pots.
Yeah, and not that I wouldn't do it myself. I only knew what those things were and where they could be purchased. But for want of that, I'll just leave the bottle open and let it kind of fumigate.
So you're happy with the results of that?
Yeah, and that's that'll be 2 years old in December. They were all made 2 Decembers ago, or 2 December and January kind of space. So yeah, it's not even whiskey yet, but it's. And again, I drank quite a bit of that one. Mash 10. There were 10 bottles of still strength liquid held from each run. And at first we thought, okay, this is plenty for both the GCMS analysis and the sensory analysis, and Michael and I to do as much logging as we want. And by the end, we were kind of thinking, oh, do we have as much 10 as we thought we did? And we kind of had to cut ourselves off of a few of them. And definitely, again, this was one that I probably, drank a good bit of at various stages in the process. Even though it's called Mash Bill 10, it wasn't actually the last distill. The numbers are the thesis numbers, not the regimen numbers, because of course there was the big thing with the amount of adjuncts used. So the first day of the thesis project, the engineering firm that had kitted out Bone, they said they wouldn't take any responsibility for what happened, that the liability did not cover this. I thought, well, this is a really optimistic start, And if like a pipe burst, it was my fault. And I remember, the 5% oats going through, no problem, 15, 20. And it was when it got to 30, I thought, okay, if something goes wrong today, this is it. And when we got over that kind of wave, like, I felt a huge sigh of relief, funnily enough, even the rye, when they did the rye to higher volumes at 30%, it was more or less fine. But then when they did a few runs of making American style rye whiskey, and that's where they started having problems. So it was amazing that up to 30 it was okay, but then after 51,
that wasn't part of your thing. So
no, not at all. So I was there that day, and I saw distiller Michael walk in looking like the Walking Dead, and been up since 3 a.m, in this nightmare, and thinking, oh, this. Thank God I wasn't responsible for this, And I didn't want to rub it in at the time of like, well,
that's on your insurance,
I
buddy.
didn't come up with this. But they were done in an order that would kind of, lead up to in case there were problems along the way. So 10 was there from a relative. 10 has 15% oats again in it. It definitely did end up in a lot of comparisons. It's also, there's one that was 15% oats and 5% wheat. There's a lot of them that share Again, they were picked on purpose from all the mash bills in the thesis, A, because of these guidelines, and B, to create parallels. So you get one where it's 30% malt, 40% barley, 30% oats, and you got to know whether it's 30, 40, and then 30% wheat. And, you can make strong contrast, or 15% oats, 15% wheat, and the other two variables are the same. Trying to keep as much stuff alignable so you can make comparisons. So again, it was it all made sense at the time, this apparatus of choices. There were a lot of stuff to go through. And of course, they all had to be decimalized from original source material anyway. The source material, especially before the 20th century, the idea of like a hard fixed mash bill is not, it's there, but it's not down to the percentage. They're like waving vibrations, and you can tell people have a house practice, but it sometimes drops or goes up, or and of course there's real world problems where you see in the legislature, they just say like, wheat too expensive this period. There's no wheat. And that's it, and where you really start seeing precision is when you start getting the bigger ones where they're working to scale, and it's just more economic the numbers are so big that the percentages don't really vary that much.
That's fantastic. Fionnán, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah.
I'm glad you cleared up the Red Book question for me and
no
the poutine
problem.
question. And I'm very happy that I got to taste the number 10 and be a part of the tasting of today's version of number 10. And I can't wait to see what the whiskeys will taste like when they're legal.
I know, neither can I.
Thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you very much, Carrie.
Like what you've seen on BRC? Want to see more? Experience more? And maybe even taste more? Then head over to our Ko-fi site and become a member of the Barrel Room Parlor. By choosing the copper level membership, you'll have exclusive access to videos related to topics discussed on the podcast and blog posts for members only. As an Amber member level, you'll enjoy everything from our copper level as well as various spin-off series including The Cutting Room Floor and Kindred Spirits. In addition, the Amber membership includes exclusive discounts to live in-person events. To join, visit www.barrelroomchronicles.com and click on Become a Member in the navigation bar. Or go straight to our Ko-fi site at ko-fi.com/BRC and click on the membership link. Once you've joined, you'll have access to everything your chosen level has to offer. You'll even be able to participate with the show by commenting on videos and other posts. Don't wait. Sign up today for exclusive content and event discounts in the Barrel Room Parlor. To learn more about Fionnán O'Connor, his research, and the Red Book of Ossory, visit barrelroomchronicles.com for today's show notes. Next time on BRC, I speak with Morgan Hancock about her nonprofit Bourbon with Heart and the launch of Arts and Spirits magazine, which hits stores September 1st. That does it for today's show. To read notes on this episode or learn more about our guests, please visit barrelroomchronicles.com. Want to interact with the show or have questions for our guests? Then ask them on our socials or send us an email through our website. Or better yet, leave us a voicemail on our website and your recording might be played in our new Speakeasy segment. If you like what you heard, please rate and subscribe to the podcast. If you really liked it and you want to show your support, buy us a whiskey through our Ko-fi site at ko-fi.com/BRC or become an exclusive member of the Barrel Room Parlor, where you'll get exclusive content not seen anywhere else. If you work in the whiskey or spirits industry or just have a deep passion for whiskey and want to share your spirits journey, register to be a guest through our website. Last but not least, please enjoy your spirits responsibly. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, Salangeva.
Barrel Room Chronicles is a production of First Reel Entertainment and is distributed by Spotify for podcasters and is available on Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, and wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts.